Hold on. Are we here? Are we there? Can you hear me? You out there? Hello. Hello, hello. Hold up. How's that? Alright, cool. Hello. Monday corn stream, a new week, a new beginning, new opportunity, uh, things of that nature. Hold on. Let's see. Check. Okay. So, uh, new week, new Monday stream. I am yet again trying new things out. So I sort of got a whole Cubase thing figured out, how to stream my audio from there so that I can add compression and stuff like that, and uh, throw a limiter on so I don't peak. Hopefully that's coming through. It sounds pretty clear on my end. It's kind of hard to tell. Check. Okay. Yeah, I got some advice from this channel on YouTube, Stephen Mellon. He does like these advice and composition videos, and he was just answering a bunch of my questions. Might be that I will have to, in terms of streaming, look into a different DAW. I've been using Cubase 5 for like 7, 8 years, and I guess certain things just aren't compatible with newer. I mean, like, I'm streaming through Streamlabs right now. Certain things might not be compatible with newer programs. Just lots of technical things that take a lot of time and energy to understand, and my heart has never really been into that sort of thing, which is why I've never been too into doing too much on this platform, other than dropping songs every now and again. But now I'm taking the opportunity trying to figure these things out. So yeah, I'm looking at maybe Ableton if I want to do things, working on streaming audio or putting together sort of like like a live performance out of like my laptop or something. Or perhaps I can figure out how to. I mentioned this in another stream. I got this GoPro and I haven't really touched it because I've been doing other things, and it's a whole another thing I got to figure out. So, but there's a possibility I could use that to stream video to my computer, but it's not as simple as just plugging it in and doing it. It'll be a lot of things to figure out, possible workarounds that may or may not cost some amount of money to a lot of money. So that's going to take some time before I start to incorporate that. But yeah. Lately, I mean, so this stream, I'm going to talk about some things that have sort of been on my mind. I haven't talked, I did, I had a sort of like current events thing going with some of the stream where I'm like, hey, let's talk about this thing that happened and this other thing that happened. And I've kind of gone away from that just because it's not really, I don't know. I don't know if it's, my perspective on those things is very like effective, at least my analysis, when it comes to spending an hour trying to talk about something like that. I want to try and, basically, maybe there's certain things that are less effective use of my time and resources, when other people have more digestible analysis than I might put out. But I'll try and use my unique perspective, I guess, on whatever I think is interesting enough or something that I can put together for one of these streams without kind of juggling a bunch of different things. So today, I'm just going to kind of talk about some things that have been on my mind. I have the whole, alluding to Rage Against the Machine, which is sort of inspired this line of thinking, but I'll get into that. Um, Looking ahead, like I said, I've been working on a lot of different things, and I've been trying to have a certain balance between uh, making sure I work on things because they're interesting to me, but not just putting my nose to the grindstone day in and day out and just burning out. Because I think in this situation where you are, um, I mean, it's scenarios and environments that I'm somewhat honestly pretty familiar with. Um, but it's different because whereas there may have been times where because of my you know uh, my financial state or my frame of mind, it's like I don't never like the idea of having to go out and spend a bunch of money in order to have a good time. But to some degree, there's always been some sense that like you can't really do much for free, you know, if you want to leave the house or whatever. So, but every now and again, I'll at least be able to hang out with friends and then do things and be sociable, which is a nice vacation away from the isolation of my normal day to day. But now in this situation where I don't necessarily have the choice of changing my environment when I feel like it would be nice to, I'm very wary, and I would caution everyone else who's in a similar situation who has a new opportunity to work on things that they haven't before, focus themselves on different things that they might find more personally fulfilling than the things they spend their time on in the normal, whatever, before world, before this situation came about. Still, I think burning out in this situation is very dangerous because I feel like it'd be much harder to recover when you don't really have any other kinds of stimulation or inspiration to sort of escape to and recover with. I mean, we have infinite anyone if you have an internet access and the means to access different kinds of information. Oh, uh, we if you have the means to do those things, it's you kind of have like the world at your fingertips, but it's a different um, even for someone who's spent a long time, you know, on the internet and has lived that as part of their life for a very long time. You desire other things, other kinds of stimulation, other kinds of reprieve. So I have been fairly busy, but I'm trying to take stock of those things. I'm not necessarily psych myself out of doing the things that I want to do, but also not falling into just a cycle where I just exhaust myself or feel like I have to do. The opportunity of this situation for me at least is that I'm not obligated necessarily to do anything, so I can do what I want. But it's easy enough to get the mind frame where it's like I have to do these things, and to some degree, uh, you want to keep yourself on track with certain things like personal hygiene and your well-being and things like that, nutrition. But in terms of productivity, which is another conversation I might have down the line, that's something that should be monitored more closely to make sure you're not going overboard with that, which I think a lot of people might do when they're used to, I don't know, going 110%, all the time. Anyway, uh, so yeah, in the future, a lot of things I'm sort of juggling. Again, figuring out the stream thing, which is sort of helping me figure out just in general how I might carve out my little space and what kind of things I might focus on now that I'm gearing myself more towards where instead of doing stuff on YouTube and things like that, it's just something I do on the side every now and again when I feel like it, just making it some more of a regular thing, especially in the future if I can build this up. But there are some things I could probably announce like a little bit later, but not necessarily right now. So there's that. And now for the topic of the day. So I've been sort of exploring the grill pill mindset, as laid down by Matt Christman of Chapo Trap House. Um, he has, it's sort of a, I guess it's sort of a Zen mentality of, I don't know, something about basically understanding the limitations of your influence, um, and not trying to just unload all your anger and your anxiety onto the internet, because that's not really productive, and it doesn't really accomplish anything other than you know offloading your feelings down the road instead of addressing them in the moment, in your own personal space, in your own way that you can control in your immediate purview. So I've been sort of thinking on that, and thinking about sort of, I don't know, even before this, I was online all the time. Now I'm still online all the time, although I try to meter out my experience a little more as I can, and sort of take in what I take in a different way. Um, Even though my own personal world is very small and very, day to day is not particularly dramatic. Obviously, there's all these things that are going on around us that seem humongous and overwhelming and constant and just endless. Hard to keep track of. It's hard to form feelings around, form ideas around. There's a sense of, what is the solution, what is good and what is bad. Um, and it feels almost a personal responsibility to parse these things and to have a concrete response to them. But really, most of anything that would have a real material effect on our circumstances are sort of out of our hands. I've mentioned other things like mutual aid, helping out neighbors who are having a tough time, or even just reaching out to people who are just mentally having, just stress and anxiety and things like that. I mean, these are things that a lot of us can accomplish, that would have a concrete effect on other people, um, and would be something we could observably have an effect over. But when it comes to things like discourse around, you know, the inefficacy of, say, Congress to actually pass legislation and pass budgets that have a positive effect on people's lives and save people's lives, or conversations about um, why is there really a push to quote unquote reopen the economy and reopen the country and things like that, and is there really a significant percentage of people who desire that? What are people's motivations? Are people wanting people to go back to work for their own businesses? Do people just need money so they could pay rent? Um, Conversations about those things, and sort of drawing our lines in the sand, in a way that's not just in our own heads. So I can go on Twitter, I can go on Facebook, and be like, the orange guy in the White House is a monster, and this congressperson sucks, and this congressperson is okay. Um, Trying to turn these things that, in a way, like, politics, people have different views on what it is and what it actually means. For me, I'm one of those people, everything is politics. It's always, it's ever present. And it affects every facet of our lives. From the technology we use to the food and drinks we consume, entertainment, our infrastructure, things like that. I mean, that's all anything that has to do with resources, power, the effect of structures on our lives. That's all politics to me. Now we're in a situation where even people who are not normally, who don't like to think of politics as something that concerns them, it concerns all of us, because the response to the pandemic by our governments has a direct effect on our lives and the lives of people that we know and care about. So now it's much more in our faces, although there are still people who find a way to I don't know, disconnect from reality or whatever, for whatever reason. There, it should be, and it seems to be a lot more clear in this case, for most people. So, but at the same time, in terms of actually affecting change on your own situation, it's like, you can't make other people stay home. You can't make the government pay people so they can stay home. You can't build more medical care infrastructure so that we can have more of a capacity to actually treat people who get sick and people who are sick or injured from other things, and they're not compromising themselves and overloading the system more, by adding. It'd be nice if we could, as individuals, affect those things, but we can't. So our recourse for the feeling of not being able to affect a meaningful change on these things, even though they have an effect on us, is, you go online and you post, or you argue with people, or you talk to your friends and you sort of bitch about this and that, and nothing changes. And then the next question after that is, well, then what can you do? And the answer is, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. And the conversation about strategy and things like that. That's something we can have, and that's something that there are other people who have way better perspective on that than I do. In terms of how can I, as an individual, offer my own, offer what I can to a sort of collective effort to make a meaningful change on these systems that affect all of us, in order to better them in a way that benefits those same people. But again, that's a different conversation, slightly different than what I want to talk about today. Just so as someone, I'm a musician, most of what I do is sort of politically inconsequential in terms of, like, you think about political music. I use Rage as the draw in my thumbnail and in the title. As for me, most of what I do is apolitical. It's just entertainment. But obviously, the attachment to what I do, even if the music itself is not imparting anything, any kind of messaging, there could be implicit messaging. So, I mean, I don't know. If I play on a bandstand for celebrating somebody who's a real asshole, the music that I'm playing may have nothing to do with that person, but, in a way that I'm glorifying said asshole. Or say if I go and put on uniform of United States military and I play in a performance, even if the music itself has nothing to do with war and governmental forces and things like that, there's an implicit message in the association. So even in the realm of sort of apolitical music, there's that. Even though that's, I guess, where I spend most of my time, as an artist, as someone who's written songs and things like that, and who shares their opinion, I may have more personal and explicit messaging in things that I do, but I often think about what is really the outcome of something like that. And I use Rage as an example. So I don't know if you guys remembered when it was in 2012 when it was Romney versus Obama, Obama's re-election year. And he picked Paul Ryan, a great guy who we all love, and is definitely good, and definitely didn't help accelerate the redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top in this country, and reinforcing inequality and things like that. It was reported like, oh, he loved Rage Against the Machine, and Tom Morello was like, "You're an idiot, and you don't understand our music." But I believe it was like Polyphonic or something, one of these YouTube sort of like video essay channels that's focused on music, talking about Rage Against the Machine, and Tom and Zach are these intelligent, educated guys who have a very clear worldview and clear analysis of things, and they have they wear their alliances on their sleeves. But you can listen to their music and not give a shit about any of that, and the message will mean nothing to you. I.e., Paul Ryan, deeply conservative jerk off, who probably couldn't care less about the radical message of Rage Against the Machine. But the explicit intent and goal of music like Rage is to use their catchy music to disseminate an analysis and a message about the society we live in. And I'm sure a layperson could listen and be like, yeah, that guy's really mad at the system, and not really get a sense of any deeper analysis, nor really get a feeling that they've been called to action for anything like that. I mean, I've watched interviews with them, and I've seen things, and they have this very workers of the world unite kind of vibe in the things that they say, and it's certainly in the music, in the lyrics anyway. But just because the message is in there, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that's what the audience is going to take away. And I mean, like, in a less I guess politically minded example, my own music, I feel like as a lyricist in the past, like I've sort of like, my thing has tried to be more symbolic and more obtuse, less literal, less obvious, more enigmatic, but at the same time having enough through lines to where I hope that the listener can understand what it is I'm trying to communicate. And maybe there's a sense of alienation and isolation behind the sort of like hiding things behind layers that is also part of like the art that I want to communicate. And yet still, have situations where they're like, have like, hey, what do you think of it, and what does it say to you? And it has nothing to do with my own thoughts behind putting it together, even though I feel like I'm very thoughtful about those things. And I guess the question is, one, does the message matter? And along with, does the message matter, does the author intent matter? And two, is it on the audience member whether or not they get it? And that I mean, I guess it's more of a philosophy question. I guess, and I'm just kind of like spitballing here. I'm really just working out my thoughts. Because I would love to frame it more, less in a sense of philosophy, more in a sense of strategy, as in like, can we as musicians, artists, or whatever, people who can share their opinion in a visible space, can we affect meaningful change with a message, with a piece of art, with our opinions? Is that something, I mean, like, Rage sold millions of records, incredibly enduringly popular band. A lot of people still know about them, and the figures of the band are still recognizable. and they're, you know, Rage, Public Enemy. There are a lot of examples like that. Um, folk singers of the last century, uh, having very specific and political messages. Um, and yet, even if their message reaches the majority of their audience, what is the payout? I mean, is it that, like, if I am Zach De La Roca and I can have 1 million people listen to my song about, I don't know, police brutality or whatever, and then 50% of those people actually get what I'm talking about, then what is it, like 1% of those people or 0.5% of those people actually go and, I don't know, join an anarchist collective or something like that agitates for uh, uh, criminal justice reform and I don't know, like I don't know. I guess really the obvious answer is like that's hard to quantify. It's probably impossible to quantify. And in reality, there's a million factors that influence every individual. Um, I certainly don't think it's worse to have these kind of things out there, but I don't know. Does it matter if you're an artist and you understand that there's a limit to your influence? Um, I mean, it's so much easier to motivate people to do things that are like systematically encouraged and like set up to be very convenient. Like I've also thought about these sort of like astroturf sort of influencer musician campaigns to be like, hey, we're gonna get my song to number one on so and so chart or get it platinum through streams because all of my fans are gonna stream my song on as many devices as they possibly can 24 hours a day until I reach this benchmark. And that's easy because you're just using the mechanisms of consumption that are designed to be as efficient and easy to use, and effort to reward ratio is as wide as possible. Whereas if I'm a band who's like, hey, we need to have a mass revolution to overthrow the hierarchies in our society and reform our economic system, that's a lot less easy than pressing play on Spotify. And it's certainly not just the fact that it takes more effort, but it takes a clearer vision. It's a lot more broad and it's a lot more ambitious. So I don't know. What if there was something like some popular rapper or something was like, "Hey, I'm gonna write this hit song and it's gonna be all about boycotting Amazon for the entire month of June, um, and it will coincide with some kind of general strike or something. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a lot more specific and a lot more actionable, and it's easier because it's sort of the absence of boycott is. I mean, unless it's something like super um, integral and essential to someone's like livelihood. It's like we're gonna boycott drinking water. Um, not doing something is generally gonna be easier than doing something, especially in a way where doing something you are attempting to redirect the roots and the systems of distribution and power and whatever. Um, but I don't know. Uh, you know, talking about at least my plans and my goals and my own, thinking about the own possibility of things that I can do. I think there are a lot of like musicians and artists who like they can communicate in their medium, and that's how they express their feelings and their ideas. I guess for me, like, yeah, I'm a musician, but I feel like I can easily say what I want to say just with my words. It doesn't have to be poet, but in the form of poetry. Sometimes it's nice, but I can also do it conversationally. I can say what I want to say. Um, so in a way, I don't have to sort of offload that into my music, which is, I don't know, has its ups and downs. But in terms of thinking about what I want to do and what I can do, and how to use the platforms that I have some understanding of, i.e., YouTube or whatever, social media. Um, I've thought of doing sort of video essay style content on YouTube where I talk about things that sort of intersect music and philosophy, sort of like how like an Adam Neely does these things kind of often, where he's asking these questions about not just theory and history, but just sort of like how do we judge these values of things, and um, how do we perceive things, how do we think about things. Except my stuff, I mean, obviously my stuff would be different just because I'm making it. And it's not too cliche to point out that a lot of the people who create popular content on YouTube, whatever subgenre it may be, they tend to be white guys. And just inherently through my unique experience as someone who's not a white guy, I would just, like, as long as I was being honest to my experience, I would have something different to say. But also in terms of like the deliberate part of my content and like what I would choose to focus on, um, I have ideas ranging from something pertinent to this conversation, which is the politics of musicians, and which I would sort of do a historical look at, between, like I said, those folk musicians of the last century to a group like Rage Against the Machine, or someone like Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, exploring the personal politics of those individuals and how they imparted it into their music, and the ups and downs of that. I don't know. I mean, I could look at my notes real quick. Which you guys can't see because I'm on my desktop. Let's see, video ideas. Ooh, the functionality of music. And what do artists work? What constitutes work? How do we assign value to labor? It'd be very like I'd wear my politics on my sleeve, more so than some other people who are. There's a whole YouTube, music theory, music history kind of side, and it's got all of its major characters, but none of them are particularly engaged in an analysis of the material analysis of how these things affect everybody, and just sort of how I can view music and the act and the work of doing music or art or whatever, and view that from a lens of, I don't know, labor centric, or economic, Marxist, whatever. So I'd be a lot more specific, I guess, in that regard. And I don't know, I guess in thinking about these things, I guess there's some hope that, like, my analysis and my perspective, and if I can put together something that is entertaining and insightful, then it'll somehow I don't know, enlighten somebody and change their trajectory and change the things that they might choose to do, and that will sort of have some effect on this world, in line with my views and my desires for our system of governance and society and whatever. But I guess I asked this question, like, I mean, how much? I mean, there are all these there's a lot of politically charged YouTube content, and YouTube is a very easy way to take in a lot of information, which is good and bad. I mean, it's for a long time, and I think basically it still is, like, very right wing viewpoints were sort of having the most um, occupying the most space on the platform, and you still have something like PragerU, which is a bunch of right wing bullshit, still getting tons of views on YouTube, and now you have what LeftTube or BreadTube or whatever the hell you want to call it, people making efforts to sort of educate their bases about different subjects and convince them to their position. But again, I mean, I think in a way, obviously, if there's some like neo-Nazi guy who's on this, YouTube alt-right rabbit hole, and then they watch somebody's video and they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to be a Nazi anymore." Like, that's good. I think that's undeniably a good thing, but there's still that. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Like, I can go on Twitter and there's like literally scroll through thousands and thousands of people, which probably maybe represents a larger. They may be a representative of a larger demographic, or maybe they are just the only people who believe like, oh yeah, capitalism sucks and we have to have overthrow the system, and our government's not working for us, and our economic system only benefits those at the top at the detriment of 90% of people on the bottom, and things like that. And it seems like a lot of people understand and believe these things, but we're not able to collectively affect the change, even though that's the whole analysis of how we introduce change, right? We, as a collective group of workers or whatever, withholding our work or otherwise using our influence on the world in order to halt the gears of capital, in order to gain concessions from the pillars of power or whatever. But we're not doing that. Maybe all these people got these ideas from those YouTube videos or other people that they follow or their friends, or maybe they read theory, or it was their own personal experiences, or a combination of all these things. We're not necessarily putting it into action. So how far can that? I guess that's what my question is. How far can these things take us? And I think, obviously, I think the answer is obviously to me whether or not these things should even be attempted. I think more things in the world existing that have an intention that lines up with my beliefs and my morals and my my I don't know, understanding of things is better than having fewer of those things and having the conversation be dominated by things that I'm in opposition to. But I think, I don't know, especially now where a lot of people are cooped up at home and they're just spending all their time on the internet, I think it definitely is overshadowed, or it's blown out of proportion how important these things actually are and how valuable these things actually are. I think inspiration can be, can make or break something. Honestly, there's been times where it's like, because I was inspired or because I was dejected, decided whether or not I was actually able to accomplish something. So there's that. Certainly, hearing a lyric or something like that, or hearing perspective might inspire you to dig into a subject further. And maybe there's sort of like, if there's a cultural aspect to it, which I think, again, I'll mention Chapo, they talked about how liberals won the culture war over conservatives, which is generally true. Like in our media, multi-billion-dollar corporations pay some lip service to marginalized communities, but ultimately, I don't know, does it actually meaningfully change anyone's lives? I mean, maybe on some anecdotal level, but the hierarchical relationships are still in place. Or for example, Obama, if we had a black president who oversaw like the halving of black wealth in America, like in his response, or black homeowners, I can't remember what the value was, but basically in response to the '08 recession and the housing market collapse, black households lost a significant portion of their wealth under a black president. So does the diversity and representation actually matter when your material conditions get worse? Um, Again, I mean, it should be easy to say, well, like no, um, but I guess the more nuanced answer is it matters less than certain people say it does. Um, and I guess that brings me back to sort of the grill pill thing of sort of offloading your anger and your anxiety about the current situation, which like I do, and I have the urge to because it's frustrating and it's like, what the fuck am I gonna do? This shit is crazy. And you have people who are saying things that you're like, what is wrong with you? How do you not see, what's right in front of your face? And you want to like argue with them or yell at them or whatever. But it doesn't usually go further than just kind of uh, satiating that immediate urge because that feeling is just going to come up again because you didn't solve anything. Um, so, uh, I mean, I don't know. I guess what is the solution to one, ask an audience to take more seriously calls to action or things like that, and to, I don't know, have artists put their money where their mouth is and engage in political change that they want to see in the world, blah blah blah. Um, I don't know. I guess for me, as someone who's coming from the side of like an artist, it's like I guess just as long as people understand that there's only so far that their influence can go. Whatever your message is or whatever your intention is, it only goes as far as the individual receiving it takes it. And at the end of the day, any one piece of art or whatever, I mean, it's just another piece of the puzzle. It's not, may not necessarily be a deciding factor or as important as certain spaces online may make it seem. And maybe a lot of artists don't really even see it that way anyway. Maybe they're just trying to get out their own feelings, their own frustrations, and they're trying to package it in a way that is digestible, but also is in some way inspiring or whatever. Sort of calls to action in some way. So I don't know. I think it's really, I guess it's really an ongoing conversation. I mean, I know, I mean, if I could have a guest spot right now, I've talked to other people. I've talked to someone who's sort of like a documentarian who sort of engaged in different like art spaces and was like, we really got getting out this message to people and educating people and blah blah blah. But I mean, like, I don't know. Can you educate people about their own personal experiences? You have to sort of make a connection to what's going on in people's lives. And I mean, like for me, arts, music, whatever, um, there's very concrete energy with a lot of those things. There's certainly like if I listen to Rage Against the Machine, I get a very specific feeling, which I think is what their intention is. Like I think I feel the way they want me to feel, but that doesn't necessarily translate to thinking the way they want me to think. It's a more abstract, more nuanced, and has a lot more to do with the perspective and the material reality of myself as an individual. Someone who's a fucking college conservative who becomes a Republican politician is going to have a very different set of circumstances and different perspective than someone who's, I don't know, a poor kid, working um, you know. But also, which one of those things which one of those positions are you able to affect more change? But I guess the easiest the one easy lesson is that, in which we understand, if we're looking at things from, I guess, the Marxist perspective, or collectivist, labor oriented perspective, is that individual action and individual power is not gonna get us where we need to go, because things that favor the individual over the collective are sort of necessarily opposed to those goals anyway. The two, just like there isn't that much power we have as individuals. Like, now in our consumer society, the individual is elevated, and that manifests in times of crisis in, people hoarding, people protesting things that are supposed to protect all of us out of some weird sense of, their freedom or whatever, even though it's just freedom to consume or to force others to do labor for them, or people committing violence against other people for whatever reason. Um, those are the manifestations of, this uh, exalted individualism that we have in our consumer society. Um, but in terms of actually affecting meaningful change over our society versus, just kind of greasing the wheels of capital, and just keeping everything chugging forward, which all those things still contribute to, even if they seem horrifying. Um, as individuals, we can't like throw a wrench in that. It's just there's just not enough influence and power unless you are, incredibly wealthy. Like, I'm sure. Well, I don't know. Maybe even fucking Jeff Bezos, who's going to be a trillionaire, which that is horrifying. That's disgusting. And I think that happening in a time of pandemic is one of the most troubling things that is developed in this entire thing, and that's something that should worry absolutely everyone. That's horrifying. But I don't know. Maybe even if because I know, people say, oh, he's got billions, and yeah, I know he doesn't necessarily have billions liquid. He's not walking around with, like, gold bars falling out of his pants or anything like that. But, as the richest person in the world, he has way more sway than pretty much any other individual on the planet. So, he could probably do something about all this. But then again, the system of capitalism still exists, and other capitalists still exist, and the economic system and the infrastructure around all those things still exist, to the point where even if he steps down and tries to use as much of his wealth and influence as possible to dismantle it, I think he could easily address a lot of the issues of poverty with even just his own investments and his liquid assets. Easily solve a number of issues of poverty, um, hunger, undereducation, medicine, things like that. Easily, as an individual, he could solve those problems with just liquid assets and things that are easily redirected. But in terms of dealing, I mean, doing those things would go towards changing our structure. As an individual Herculean redistributive effort, it would do something to our system, especially because once people realize, like, hey, actually, it is possible for one of these rich guys to solve all our problems, or a lot of our problems. Maybe we should solve all of our fucking problems. But that's more of like a sort of like snowball effect. But it would still take work and effort to reorganize and dismantle the economic systems that we have in place, because they're so vast and labyrinthine that even just taking out the head, so to speak. I mean, there is no real head. It's the robber baron octopus thing. You can cut off the biggest tentacle, but the whole thing is still there. So, I mean, again, the point is that even individual action that has the most power behind it is not going to be the thing that addresses these issues. And again, in the context of artists, like, yeah, we can spread our messages and become influential artists and have lots of people listen to what we have to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do those things. What it takes is things that are way more strategic, take way more time and a lot more effort and work. And in terms of those prescriptions, I don't necessarily have them for you. If you are a worker who works in an industry where you have unions that are dedicated to labor rights, I mean, engaging in that is a good idea, or creating union in a space that doesn't have a union and making that centered around worker rights and solidarity between disciplines and things like that. Music is very, very, that's a difficult one because we have unions, but our work is so atomized and decentralized. It's like, we're all so in such different circumstances, and all the work we do is so different, so many different employers, that it would be hard to be like, hey, all musicians, we're going to stop working until people actually pay us more. you know, certain, the union can do certain things like that, and they can blacklist certain venues and certain people and things, and they can guarantee certain pay when they're doing contracts with major, like if they're going to do orchestra session for a Marvel movie. The union can guarantee very specific wages for the musicians, but that's like 100 people in an area of millions get to enjoy those benefits. So I don't know. It's a combination of people who have heard the message and do understand the message, engaging with those in their community, but not just in a preaching way. You can't just go around and stand on a soapbox and hold a sign and be like, wake up sheeple or whatever, because that's not going to resonate with anybody, unless they're just, why a lot of these like radical movements are maybe spearheaded by college educated kids. Part of it is because maybe if they had a decent education, they might be exposed to some new ideas and some critical analysis of things that they might not normally think about, but also because when you're younger, you're more open to these ideas and you're going to be more passionate about these things because you're maybe a little less jaded or something like that. So maybe that kind of thing will work on that group, but it's not going to work on some hardened, beaten down, poor whatever person. So there has to be a way that it's not just preaching, some way to engage in your community to show that you have skin in the game, and organizing your community, not necessarily being a community organizer, and not just in an abstract way. I mean, like, I don't know. There's this like whole nonprofit scene of it's like, oh, you're working in a nonprofit or you're doing things for charity or benefit or whatever. That's just inherently a good thing. There's very few things you could talk about in that abstract level that is inherently one thing or another. It's only good if it benefits marginalized people. Otherwise, maybe it's just making people feel good or look good. So you have to be specific in your goal, for one, and two, you have to engage with the people who are being affected, because again, even though I'm one of those people who are like, yeah, politics is literally everything, even in this situation that might not be the case for everybody, or maybe they're not necessarily thinking of it in those terms and not seeing the connection between their own poverty, their own lack of access to medical care, their lack of support from their government. Maybe in some intrinsic way they're going to see those connections, but they might not necessarily see their place in it and how they can affect the change through collective action. So I don't know. I mean, so I read a little bit about sort of the DSA's strategy of sort of their insurgent strategy of inserting themselves into sort of worker groups, by having members join certain workforces, unions, or sort of building relationships with rank and file workers in different key industries in order to sort of spread messages and uh, build build their networks in that way. Which I mean sounds like how else would you know a ragtag group of radicals actually build a mass movement? I mean, we sort of had, yeah, talking about the election, we sort of had this instant mass movement with the Bernie campaign, and that was sort of the way to give a shot in the arm to the political discourse and the machinery of all that in our electoral system. But obviously, it couldn't overcome um, the the ace in the holes that the establishment had, whether that was in the form of media consensus around electability and bogus narratives of like Bernie Bros and stupid shit like that, or Obama making deals with Klobuchar and Buttigieg in order to rally behind Biden in a key moment. Um, that movement was not able to overcome those obstacles. And now you have a sort of loss of momentum from all that. Um, so, I mean, yeah, just me, that leaves people like me and a lot of others thinking, okay, well, what do we do now? And I guess that's why I'm having these thoughts and having this, you know, conversation. I'm just monologuing, really. Um, so I guess I don't know. So what I guess I don't have much more I can go on and on about with that. To be a better conversation, particularly with someone who is trying their own ways of affecting this change that we've been talking about. But I guess I can finish by sort of, I'll take another beat to sort of ponder about okay, what can I do, what will I do? I guess I'll continue to do this and sort of form my own positions, find ways to present them in a digestible way, and use this time that I have to think about, as the situation develops, what is it we can do that we weren't doing before, or what can we add to that was working before, to give that momentum, because we are in a recovery state. When I say we I speak of all these things from the perspective of sort of broad leftist, leftist centering around a critique of economic, racial, gender, etc. Structures, class structures, sort of coming from a Marxist analysis, critical of capitalism and things like that. That's what I mean broadly by left. So people who are just socially liberal, who have no real critique of the capitalist system, I would not put in the category of being on the left. You're just liberal, socially liberal, or progressive, or whatever. But I mean, I think that's a meaningful enough distinction because the goals are different. and therefore the methods should be different. Not that certain things can't overlap, but in the grand scheme, to address inequality broadly, I think you need to address issues of class, not just um, representation in media and things like that. The things that people online care about. Um, so I don't know. Maybe I'll have to end it on a more open-ended question. So if Rage Against the Machine is not the answer, or maybe it's one of the answers, what else do we have? What else can we do? And again, thinking about I'm doing these things as an individual, exploring things as an individual, but I guess the ultimate lesson is understanding that there's no real change uh, enacted by individuals. Even we have um, economic figures like a Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whatever, and we have revolutionary figures like a Che or a Castro or what have you. But it's not like none of these people did anything on their own. Not anything, but none of these people did those big things on their own. Is the important takeaway. So think more strategically, and which effectively means think more collectively, and more in terms of horizontal solidarity than top-down pity or charity, and working with people from other groups versus reaching down and pulling the paupers out of I don't know, misery, feeding education to the masses and things like that. They can have some cultural effect, and that can sort of have a secondary effect of radicalizing or educating people or inspiring people to become educated about these topics, or giving people a sense of pride and a sense of aesthetic, something they can like a goth person wearing all black or a metalhead wearing all black and talking about Satan or whatever, instead of just having those aesthetic cultural connections, building an identity around radical politics, that can be a good thing, but it's not necessarily meaningful. But it can contribute. So I guess continue to do those things by understanding the limitations and understanding we have to think more collectively, and more about material, affecting material change and a sense of solidarity across different demographics. And yeah, I mean, I guess that is all I can say about that today. Again, future. I was I didn't look into multi-streaming. I mean, again, I've had a lot I've been working on, a lot I've been thinking about, and technology for me can be very frustrating. I'm trying not to lose my mind doing these things. I mean, it's really not that much work necessarily, but it can be very frustrating. So figuring out the multi-streaming thing, going Twitch and YouTube, which is, I think, is maybe what I'll do in the future. Maybe I'll dial back the YouTube streaming stuff if I can get more videos out there, but I'm working on bigger picture projects at the same time. So really these streams are a way for me to do something, a more like small things, so I can at least have something that I'm putting out there, versus spending all my time on bigger projects that may or may not come to fruition, or may take a long time to come to fruition. So keep an eye out for that. Thursday stream, maybe another practice stream, or maybe writing, something like that. Maybe something more musicy. I'm thinking for these like talkie streams, maybe space them out a little more so I have more time to think about subjects and have a little bit more to, I don't know, talk about. Uh, might do gaming stuff. I don't know. I'm playing video games. I'm just not recording it and talking over it. Um, so yeah, there'll be things I'm working on, things to announce in the future. Um, hope everyone's doing all right. I'm doing, fine. And I'll see y'all on